here, Paul Timorella. I'm just going to go through my presentation, which is more just kind of the facts of the case. I think theirs is more the why behind the facts of the case. And then, go ahead. No, oh, gosh. Yeah. Okay, there we go. That's all about it. You want to actually, you want to put your last name where it's going? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Good call. All right. And then questions as appropriate, discussion. So just to orient folks for where we are in the world, we are talking about these two properties outlined in yellow out on the eastern corridor. They span both the north and south side of the highway. Currently, this railroad piece is zoned commercial eastern corridor, and then the other two pieces are zoned to agriculture. This property on the southern side, as you know, formerly contained the former Longmont water treatment plant, and the northern property is vacant with an existing access easement for access to the town's public works site directly to the north. And then surrounding here to the to the west, you probably recall these are the table properties that were recently annexed by the town. So just the purpose of tonight is to consider a rezoning of the properties to planned unit development. This will serve, this will essentially serve as the zoning for the properties. Prior to any development on the properties, it will require approval of one or more major development plans, similar to what we did recently, to review specific proposals prior to issuance of building permit. These properties remain subject to town's commercial design standards, as well as the corridor overlay within those commercial standards. And this PUD will establish allowed uses, development standards, and exceptions to certain town codes. And it was based initially on the commercial eastern corridor zone district as a starting point. So it's just kind of showing the deviations from that zone district. So with that, we're going to dive in. Maybe. There we go. So one of the primary components of the itself so all of the uses by right just means there's no additional layer. Have a building permit if they already have a building, but we don't really question the appropriateness of the use from this location. There are a number of uses within the CEC zone district that require special review currently. The applicant is requesting to change these to use by right, as well as there are 3 uses down at the bottom which are not mentioned in the CEC zone district that they are requesting to be added. So I highlighted the ones that are a change. I know there's a lot of words on this slide. We can pause here and go through them, but I know the applicant would like to explain a little bit more about why the change. I added, we're going to come back to that, but I also added this to our conversation. Currently, a special review requires an additional layer. Development plan, so we could take a look at the site and the building and the layout on kind of first development, or it could require a special review kind of later on if a new user is moving into an existing space. So to the degree this helps the conversation, we don't need to go through it, but this is the criteria for how we would consider special review uses, which these would be going away under the application. So I just wanted to bring this up in case it's helpful for your discussion. I want to go back then to the next kind of component of the application, which are development standards, like setbacks, heights. So again, the starting point of this would be the CEC zone district, and they are requesting pretty significant variations from the underlying zone district to allow up to what we call a 0 lot line development, which is more similar to what you find in downtown for example, our commercial downtown allows 0 lot line development. They are asking for a little bit additional height, specifically for a hotel user. Hotel users, kind of the hotel market that would probably be attracted to the site is maybe your kind of typical 4-story hotel, Holiday Inn Express type building, and so this height allowance would be intended to facilitate that type of a hotel user, as well as maintaining the existing height of the building that's out there, which is approximately 47 feet. So as you're thinking about heights for this site, you can keep that as a little bit of a frame of reference. They've also included a number of stories. Okay, so just wanted to kind of bring that in. When we look at this side setback, a small portion of the site does abut this R3 zone district, which the CEC currently requires, kind of an increased setback for adjacencies to that. And for, if you're curious, that would just be kind of that upper northwest corner of the northern portion. And finally, there's kind of a new regulatory framework that is embedded in the PUD. Temporary uses are relatively common in a lot of our neighboring communities, but for whatever reason, the Lyons Municipal Code doesn't have a framework for temporary uses. And these are really a means of approval and criteria and consideration for uses that are intended to be temporary and not permanent. So the PUD on the cover sheet has more detail about all of this, but essentially, and this is mirrored after some of our neighboring codes, so this wouldn't be unusual. It's just a new framework within the PUD. I did talk with the town attorney. He's comfortable with this approach, both setting kind of criteria, processes, and approval processes within a PUD. So up to 180 days, with up to one 180-day extension. The site can be restored back to a reasonable satisfactory condition. Obviously, parking needs to be all-weather durable. We didn't set a parking ratio. Go ahead. Yeah.
The definition of the.
We don't really have a definition, but it was not intended to require parking, but really probably not kind of right. I think crusher fines, crushed asphalt, recycled asphalt, things like that. I think to the degree we want to kind of refine this, we certainly can. Ingress and egress would need to be paved, both for in compliance with Lyons Fire and Public Works. Signage would conform with our code, and the town administrator would have approval authority. She could connect reasonable conditions related to the use, and if the application is denied, it would come to the PCDC on appeal for consideration with a public hearing. It would require, some submittal of documentation around site plan, mostly just illustrating the use. We don't need to go through all of this, but demonstrating, kind of so there are a number of discussed in more length staff report. I think from staff's perspective, the primary components to lean on for some of these changes, and it was the first criteria in the municipal code, is compliance, or consistency with our comprehensive plan. So it does allow deviations from but there are, as you know, the comprehensive plan has a number of goals, policies. I really tried to pull out the ones that I felt were the most applicable and appropriate for this particular location. We have, some outdoor recreation, arts, culture, tourism, protection of natural systems, recognizing that we have the St. Vrain River that actually flows through the southern portion of this site, making sure that we're balancing and protecting those assets. We want to balance, again, conservation, and then fiscal and environmental mix of land uses, and finally a built environment that reinforces our identity and small town feel, as well as creative strategies to revitalize vacant blighted properties, things like that. So these were the policies that I felt were the most applicable and well-rounded as it comes to this application. And finally, we also have the 2016 Lions Primary Planning Area Master Plan. This was entirely within your staff report. I don't know it, but essentially this was the vision for the Eastern Corridor sub area. This particular location in the Lions Primary Planning Area was identified as a business use, and so commercial and employment anchored gateway, right? This would be kind of the gateway into the town of Lyons. And so with that, you know, staff is not taking a strong position at this point on the changes in the zone district and the development standard uses and setbacks. I think there's a lot to consider here. PCDC collectively has, you know, a higher degree of experience with the, you know, kind of the intention behind these codes. And so before we take a position in front of the Board of Trustees, we really just wanted to dialogue with you all, considering the comprehensive plan, considering some of the original intent, but also considering the fact that when this zone district was established, we did not have some tools that we do today. So, you know, when we established the uses, we didn't have the process for a major development plan, which requires public hearings to look at buildings. We didn't have the design standards in place that we do today. So, you know, staff was comfortable bringing forth the application in this form, but really wanted to convey the changes collectively with you all. So I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to the applicants to share a little bit more about their goals and the basis of the PUD. Go ahead. Yeah. Wherever you're looking. Oh yeah, we can do questions now, or if you want to hear theirs, however you want to do it.
So goes here.
Totally up to you. Thoughts?
Excited to be here. Obviously here, highway, but we're looking. A little bit about us for those. Our history, and really, it's obviously every building you have to do has to make financial sense, but that's not our primary goal. So it's really about balancing the two. We've done a lot of what most people would consider transformative properties. We do a lot of adaptive reuse. That's primarily all we do. And, you know, infill projects. Always prioritize the character and culture of the community we are working in. And I would say one of the things that we're really proud of is that we really have no national tenants or chains in any of the projects that we're really focused on. Trying to find is, you know, smaller. We love working with dreamers, people who, what I think, create the fabric of great communities, and that's what we focus on. Yeah, it's a maybe you won't take a question. project of the development of the former Longmont water site. For those of you, I don't know how everybody's lived now, but the treatment plant was on both sides of Highway 66. There were large tanks, an office building on the north side, and then on the south side was also two large, well, actually four large tanks. There was a residence in that building for one of the operators because somebody had to be there around the clock. But the key objectives of the site for us is addressing blight and coming up with what we believe is some ideas around some natural organic growth to how we want to evolve the development. And I'm happy to tell some of the history and due diligence that we've done to find partners and people to come to the site, because I think it applies. And then part of the reason for the zoning that we're seeking is just create as much flexibility and agility in working with various uses as we possibly can. I think predictability is key for any business. And I think part of that is why we're here today. And then of course supporting economic growth and then creating what we believe could be some really beautiful assets. We purchased a property in February of 2020, like 4 weeks before COVID shut down. And it was, I think there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty, frankly, for, the next 18 to 24 months, really. We continued to do our due diligence, and during that time period, we did do asbestos abatement on the north side and then did the demo on those buildings. We contemplated removing the buildings on the south side. However, we decided to keep them and try to reuse them. We closed on them again right before COVID, 2 parcels on each side of Highway 66. There are it's about 7.5 acres totally if you look at the survey, but there's really only about 4.5 acres of usable space. Part of that is our development, because on the south side, a considerable portion of the property is in the floodplain. And then on the north side, there is a fairly sizable waste ejection pit that was installed. It benefits all of the district. The riverfront piece was one of the only remaining parcels that had not been restored since the 2013 flood. And I wish I could show you some better pictures of it, but literally the back of the building had 4 large tanks right up against the river that had collapsed into the river, and they had been there all the time. And if you haven't been to the site since we did the restoration, we'd be happy to take you, because we were all shocked. Even the town administrator, Victoria, came down and was just like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe how, it was a big change once we did the restoration." We completed that restoration, probably 8 months ago now, and it really helped inform some next steps for us. So that was a very important thing to do. The vision here is to create a memorable gateway to Lions, or be part of the gateway. Obviously, if something happens at the beginning of Highland Drive, that's where the gateway would start. But we think that the whole corridor there is really important to inviting people into a Lions experience. Somebody pointed out at our last meeting that really, if you come from DIA and you're headed, west, this is sort of the first small kind of point town, mountain town you encounter. And, with our Main Street project, we're really excited. Part of that.
We always say it's really amazing because most everything you do, you're trying to create traffic, and you guys have the traffic. It's just getting people to stop and try to capitalize on it. So we're excited for that.
And like I said, we're really trying to find a way to, celebrate and reuse a piece of really regional history. We did a historic background search on it. We hired somebody to do the work, and I think she said it was the 2nd oldest water treatment plant in Colorado. And I think the original building was built like 1923. It has been since added on to, but if you go into the big tall piece that you see now, you can see the original brick facade. It's really lovely. you know, we're trying to create, and we've had, you know, obviously there's been surrounding properties that have sold, and some of those buyers have inquired about, you know, purchasing that piece. And for now, we're really trying to wait to see what happens on the south side and what we can create there, because we really want to create some synergy between the two sites. For instance, we'd hate to put whatever kind of use that wouldn't be compatible to what happens on the south side. And I think the south side really, it's incredible. We have 600 feet of river frontage, and it's just a beautiful, could be something. So it's to create a 3-acre campus. Now this is for the north side, okay, that butts up against the public works facility. So the vision is to create a 3-acre campus with 6 unique buildings, catering to different types of makers, like classical artisans, but also welders, auto repair experts, other craftspeople who bring practical skills into the campus. So it's a light industrial village, if you will. The goal is to replace, you know, the blighted property with a vibrant light industrial hub, bring potential community services and businesses back to Lyons, and provide a green space for markets, fairs, and trade shows. The phasing on that north side would be to rezone the property, which is why we're here today. Work on all of the horizontal improvements that need to happen. The site has no water or you know, waste connection on the, there's a connection on the site, but no. And then of course roadways. And then proceed to vertical development. The north site plan, this has been a sort of working site plan for us for a while now. And I'll just point this out because when we get to the conversation about setbacks, you can see this, you know, pushes the building envelope right up to the right of way, which we think as the corridor develops, and we've done some studies around creating a parkway scenario as you're coming into Lyons there. Obviously not feasible right now, but if all of that parking is on the front of the building and those buildings are set back 20 feet or 30 feet, we think it really take away from that experience of a parkway scenario. And just, we're not, you know, parking up front. So, there, and we could send you a link to this development. There's a development in Oklahoma that is a light industrial community. These are the buildings that front the main road. This, of course, is more standard light industrial kind of product. But these are, you know, they're attractive buildings, but they're still very functional for those light industrial buildings. For the south side, we've been dreaming really big on this side. Is to bring energy and commerce to the site while celebrating important uses and honoring natural elements. Use the current infrastructure to create a one-of-a-kind destination. Activate the site through education, music, art, visual arts, health and wellness, and hospitality. The phasing would be to rezone the property, secure and police the site. We did just get electricity and a meter set there a week ago. So we're very excited about that because the building has been vandalized. I mean, literally, we welded the metal door shut, and people come out with grinders and grind the weld and break it. There's no, we have, I can't tell you what we've been through to try to secure it. We really think that getting power there and security systems and things will be the next step now. The built infrastructure and horizontal improvements, we're working on that right now, grading, parking, and a multimodal path, which we are committed to doing in that 50-foot railroad right-of-way that's along the highway. And then getting, you know, all the utilities put in, and then work on renovating existing structures. This is just a conceptual site plan of the site. This is the tall building that you see that kind of sticks up that little bump. That's that little red piece there, just to give you some context. What we're imagining is sort of a hiring, glamping, or van life use here on the east side of the property. restaurant, there's just all kinds of uses, I think. And then these are two large open air water tanks. They're about 12 foot deep, 14 feet deep, and they're existing. And our intention with this tank would be to cut into it a large opening here along the riverside and create a space that could be activated for music, conferences, weddings, car shows, name it. It could be all kinds of different things. If we were to seat it, our architect looked at it and did all the typical seating requirements, and it could seat about 400 people, just to give you a size of this, a sense of the size of it. This tank, we have dreamt and sort of imagined a really kind of high-end spa with all kinds of essential spa services. And one of the unique things about it here is that right now we're in a sauna and cold plunge. Well, in this put sauna here, and you could literally step out, go down a few steps, cold plunge, which I think that's the basic thing. These are just some images of what we'd like to create. We have this dream up on the very top floor of creating this little glass box and making it sort of a listening lounge. It could be used for library, yoga, it's for conference uses, all kinds. The community impact. So we believe that there's economic contributions, increase the property value and tax bases, create jobs, sales and lodging revenues, social cultural benefits, pay homage to the original water uses, and restore essential everyday workspaces for blind residents, and reinforce blind writing. Conclusion. We really think if we can get the project to work and get something happening, it could be catalytic for the corridor. I think the corridor really needs something. I think if we can make either side happen or even get it started, and then of course you generate job and tax revenue and property.
Shall we open it up for question? Would you like to start?
Mention one of the,
Yeah.
we've heard about the special process. Only limited certain things. There are uses that I totally understand and have want to have a special review process for. We're asking for ones that we think are pretty innocuous, that were in a special use component to come out of industry. In part also because of the implementation of the major development plan process, which wasn't in place when the zone district was put in place, and then also the design standards. And then the temp uses is something that's sort of brand new for us. We submitted this originally without any thought about temporary uses, but if you've been by the site recently, there's a spa company out of Boulder called Portal that asked if they could, park a couple of their big mobile spas on the site because they wanted to take photographs of it. And we contacted the city to make sure it was okay that they do that. They set it all up, decorated it, made it look beautiful, and then they hosted an event there to kind of, so there were people in them and it was activated. And they just had so much interest that then they hosted a couple more events. Student stuff. So, but important part of that is that it could be, they're not interested in investing the kind of money it would take to build out a full spa and infrastructure for that now. So it's sort of like maybe a lean startup sort of mentality where we could see that temporary use as being used really sort of makes sense that there's a process to it. We're open to it and aware that these abuses could happen.
I'm just, predicting that there's probably some questions about usage. There's probably some questions about design seating. Life is to have it up here or where should we start? You wanna start with? People use PUDs in vastly different ways across the spectrum of our. So some communities use PUDs in this fashion, which is really just to kind of create a custom zone district. Sometimes when it's a custom zone district, it might create their own design guidelines. So, you know, for example, the downtown Superior Town Center, that was the zone district and had extensive public, you know, design guidelines, but proposed no specific development. Louisville uses a term called a PUD, but it's actually equivalent to a development plan, so it is very specific on proposed development, but they also have that step backwards, which is more like this. So I think when you look at our code I think does envision more specificity around specific buildings and structures and site layout in our planned unit development code. But it also allows it to be a zone district, which the way this is structured is, you know, kind of a variant of the CEC zone district. But because we do have major development plan process, you know, I think there's that extra layer. So for example, like 317 Evans, which was fairly recent for a PUD, if I went back and looked at that one, they titled that one PUD and development, right? So that one, they hear that they kind of right? So because the code also requires that specific development plan. So I think we are well within the range of how PUDs out in Colorado. That being said, this one is definitely not more on kind of a zone district similar to the other have. The applicant, I think, we did talk about that, you know, more specific layout. You can do it both ways, technically, and potentially. I think that's less difficult.
From the town's point of view, why zoning?
When you say the entire district property.
We're not, because he created a placeholder.
think that's a great question. Some of for my staff is just really kind of wanting to dialogue a little bit about this with PCDC. So we have the CEC zone district was essentially created, you know, Eastern Corridor, this area. We also have over that, we have the Eastern Corridor design standards, right? So there is a lot of precedent for kind of thought and intention around what this area of town wants to develop into. I think this particular applicant would like to kind of expand the uses in particular and give the, you know, they could request all of these uses via special review. So I think from a use perspective, really the only thing it's giving is the 3 new uses that aren't currently allowed, which, you know, an alternative they could have applied. That would have applied there. And in terms of the development standards, you know, potentially those could have been considered for favor development review process, right? So I don't know that the outcome atypical, atypical, and I think
Well, I just, I'm trying to figure out.
you know, I think just given my lack I think that's to be clear, when I was reading from the 2016 Lions primary planning area, I didn't see anything in those policies that conflicts with what they'd like to do, right? I think to some degree, when we think about uses, I feel like we have other tools in the toolbox that we probably didn't have when the zone district was created that we can lean on now. Through the development plan process that would guide an applicant toward, like, you know, buffering against the river or thoughts about, you know, the natural environment down there and making sure we're minimizing impacts. So I think we have other tools in place. But I just wanted to, I think, not get in front of PCDC's experience with these particular concepts, and so we're not objecting to any of those. I think it's really just the change in the uses, and then I think the 0 setbacks, just the appropriateness of 0 setback, you know, adjacent kind of to the highway oriented corridor. It's just a little different than what, you know, the Eastern Corridor design guidelines would have contemplated.
That's something I know. I mean, I guess that's part of the vision because they are expecting a well.
I mean, that's something that but see that in the applicant portion of the highway. We are, as you know, planning the multimodal trail with the T-Devo development that is zone residential, so we will be thinking about how to bring future residents, you know, kind of across through the intersection. So I think the overall scale and intensity of development will be increasing out here. So, but to the degree, you know, we kind of want to push it this far, I guess, on the setback. And I don't know that this is, you know, I'm not trying to set this up as this is an extreme change, right? But it's just a little unique than from what was originally envisioned.
I was here
Yep.
during the original purchase of the property by
PCDC, zone was developed with property that pre-flood situation. The thinking was heavily in the direction of hotels, probably frontage, retail and makerspace with mixed use residential properties. In fact, there were proposals to that effect that were well received. They weren't approved and initiated, but the concepts were well received. The changes of the property itself are fairly significant, and the environment, the economic environment is quite different now compared to then. And so the concept of going back and revising how to look at it makes sense. The changes are, they're fairly significant, and one of my sort of fundamental questions here is what's the desired timetable? Are we talking about wanting to move these things along rapidly, or are we setting it up so that progress can continuously be made? That was one of my fundamental questions. It's a lot. And this is our first meeting at this level with this information. And that's why I'm wondering. All of a sudden, we used to have snacks, and now we have Thanksgiving dinner.
Because we've shown the property to many lots of them. We've talked with 2 or 3 different affordable housing developers, and everybody's concerned unanimously is that there's nothing there. They don't want to be the first. And the traffic, given CDOT and the way they want to handle traffic, there's going to be a challenge. Until we did show them our parkway design, and they actually took it back to their group and said they feel like that design would work. And of course, we've shown it to the town. It's a great, exciting design, but they said they wouldn't approve anything like it until there's more development anymore. Right? So they don't want to give up the 55 mph through there right now. If there's more development that happens, I don't know if T-Bow development is enough to push them over. Yes, it's not, but it's headed in the right direction. And then timeline. If everything was perfect, we'd already be under construction. But when we bought it in COVID, we couldn't get the loan. It's the nature of the property. So, we'd like to move it along as quickly as we can. We can't. We're trying forward, we set back those insurance proceeds to be worked out. Very elaborate, very legal, elaborate way to transfer those insurance funds into that project. However, we got a big red flag about a year and a half into working with CDOT trying to get the sewer line under the highway. And the initial budget we thought was around absorb that kind of cost. So basically a non-starter, we're still working it. We have another solution. Expensive, still very expensive, but so it's not an easy site that has water and electric, everything right out the front. You can just, you can let it go.
And I think too, that's my, sort of that point about, it will be organic development because maybe what can be there for a 3-year period might be different than what's there in 10 years. But to have that like, kind of a little bit over the flow, but probably not the right phrase, but that way it can be something today or tomorrow, even if it won't be its final form for several more years. So I think that's the breadth of the ask is let's try and get cool stuff there as quickly as we can, but it may not be the thing that stays there. So
And to be clear too, because this would be the zoning, no matter how fast or how slow this lives. So it's intended to accommodate, to their point, and maybe some initial temporary activation, some initial uses, and then become the zoning for redevelopment of the plan.
And I'm just one other thing I'd love to mention is that, you know, when we first approached the city about how to have this conversation around certain uses that we wanted to add or do it used by right and the height setback question, we talked about it. I think this was before, we were encouraged.
So in terms of process, like what is the alternative? of a PUD?
So, well, this is the application for the alternative, so again, they could have done an overlay, which not done here, I would probably want to look at code before I answer that question. You know, the alternative could have been to leave the zoning as it is, and then go to, you know, the development plan. Well, not leave the zoning as it, sorry, rezone to C. So just rezone to the zone district that was intended for the area and use the development plan process, the special review process for any of these potentially, and none of the decimal guidelines that are in place today. So since they had to rezone, it was either rezone to CEC or kind of rezone these, that kind of custom.
From the timeline perspective, going back to that. Whereas if it were chunked into the temporary capabilities and sort of long-term PUD zone, those issues, it would give us a little more time to absorb it all, maybe see a little more fleshing out of the long-term picture, but enable have a mechanism to enable use of the property sooner, which I think would be a relatively easier thing to work.
I think we were a little opportunistic. I discovered we have the framework for temporary uses in apply townwide. We also had this public hearing for your PUD scheduled in the, next couple weeks, and we thought it's an opportunity to embed that here. I think, I think this should be a conversation that at some point we do have townwide. Do we, how do we feel about temporary uses? Where should, how can they be considered to kind of activate and analyze certain properties? But, so it did kind of come up at the last minute, and, I agree, this is a fairly complex application.
First flash money. Some of they used by Brian.
Anything that happens. What we're trying to do. To get electricity to the. So just to get a beat. So we're just trying to do whatever we can to eliminate redundant. Sort of regular. I get that there are some things that absolutely, any town would want to have as a special approval. We tried to pick ones, for instance, doggy daycare. We didn't think it was that big a deal. We had somebody approach us and said, "Oh my gosh, we'd love to, be your first tenant in this building and have a doggy daycare associated with it, whatever side it's on. We would love to accommodate them because, just to get." We're done.
That's the language in our code that's the EC zone district today. So it was just copy pasted from that zone district. So I do think for the purposes of this PUD, you could bifurcate that, to have maybe the drive-through require the special use, but any size restaurant be by right.
And I guess it's kind of an opinion, but it's for the applicant maybe. I see these things that are PUD application used by rights. Consent, right?
And I think why staff, I think, is a little hesitant.
So a little bit of development,
Yep.
description, or maybe zoning of a diagram that shows where these things would be, how they would fit together. Like, and I don't know if
We could do that with the PUD to the degree the applicant would like to include that and have that become binding.
we have done a couple of PUD amendments,
Yep.
so I know that the PUD amendment process is possible. I would imagine it's expensive. It's legal to throw it.
And it's time.
Yeah, so
When you say future proof, I think, would that mean potentially narrowing use areas.
Where's campground? Campground money, right?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's not. For special. I know we have part. That one where.
So can't do reverter club. Ownership. So, without having the town attorney here to maybe clarify those distinctions, the zoning is.
Where I see this PUD is working is somebody says, here's a cool thing.
Yep.
And the council says, yes, we really want that. We'll put some of our rules aside to allow you to be able to do that. Cool. And that's the agreement, right?
I think this is exactly why I think staff would. Yes, behind this proposal, right? Because again, I think when you applicant provision for the site, I think collectively, you know, to what degree we could tailor this PUD to only allow that, we could, however, that's not their application.
Is there a way to like? Is there a way to pool uses to like trigger use that allows?
Yeah.
So like if there was a hospitality component, that trigger a campground component of
Yeah, so you could kind of set up a series of like principal uses and then accessory uses to that, right? So yes, I think you could structure, you could kind of tailor that.
So what I see, sure owners is the giant RV storage, big car wash, which is not mine, right? So, and it's just a given, it's easy, it's tax revenue. It's not really our vision.
So again, that's where I think, you know, under our, so say, you know, this applicant or any other applicants would apply to, you know, rezone CDC. Right, which is kind of what the original intention was for this area. This is where the criteria come on for how we. What is it? Yeah, so PCDC, so these are the criteria that we're going by. However, we do have other similar process or design guidelines now, so I think, you know, to the degree an applicant would like to do something egregious, sure, we have backstops, but the use itself wouldn't be. So I think you could steer the impacts of the use through the tools we have, but you couldn't deny the use.
For example, compared with the way it looks right now, even if it were a very nicely organized, RV parking area with a car wash, it would not be worse than.
Sure.
So that whereas for all of a sudden people saying that the PCDC did what? Kind of thing, and, you know, that's happened before. I'm not sure. I think some of it, we need to be more deliberate than others. Although timing becomes a big part of.
There's a 50-foot easement on the south property, utility.
Yep.
So
That front over
the
there.
zero lot.
Yep.
Which is a bit different, but I do agree.
There is an easement on the other side. It's not as
say I'm not opposed to adjusting the setback. And there may be a variety of ways to do that. One, it could be, look at a 10-foot or some setback, which is hardly noticeable, but enough that to be a little bit of separation. But perhaps it has to be a little more specific. It's a setback if is a building on the adjacent property also. So it'll be, site specific or something so that, so that the setbacks are, it's not, as was referenced, a new owner comes in and says, oh, 0 setbacks, right up against the wall, all the way around kind of thing. Which may not sit as well.
And so I just want to throw some. If the PCDC, there's if the PCDC isn't necessarily comfortable with, the application is written, but is comfortable with maybe directing staff to go back and amend some of these, we can go back to, right? I don't think there's any pressure tonight because I feel like we need to rewrite this. I think certainly if there's little tweaks, certainly can do that. But I think if you're like, no, actually, we do think some degree of setbacks to factor in X, Y, and Z. We can come back to you with that. On the north side, I just was going to pull this up. It looks like there's roughly on the kind of the eastern end, there's approximately 25 feet between kind of back pavement and the property line on the northern side. Sorry, back of pavement on the yeah, so it looks like about 25 feet on the eastern side, and then that narrows as you go further west. Not to say that might not expand or add more paving there, but just in terms of kind of a buffer from the roadway, there's about 25 feet today. I think that's about right. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and I think the reason it's a culvert now,
Yeah.
is really what it's for shedding on the highway, but our concern was that have the 25 feet, and then the setback beyond it is another 25 feet. Now you're 50 feet off, and in the future, right, if you want a beautiful gateway to your city, having a bunch of buildings 50 feet off of it, I don't think it lends itself to what I think. So I think it would be great to do 0 setback on this highway side or the whole corridor itself. So bringing this activation closer.
Sometimes when communities have 0 setbacks, they say kind of X percentage of the frontage or a property line can have a 0 setback, and the remainder, just so that you're not maybe their site plan doesn't show this, and they're going to have access into the site, right? I think there's some tools you could add that would, limit the amount of 0 setback. Alternatively, because the height is fairly high, say 0 setback for a 2-story building. Again, to what degree does it concern at all? Might not be.
Well, the design guidelines are indicate and agree however, said that there haven't been a lot of requests of design guidelines, but they don't seem to have been a barrier to the development discussions that have occurred since they were voted on by the Board of Trustees. And at the same time, the developers who have come forward with proposals since then acceptance and recognition of the design guidelines in the proposal at this level. This level. Downtown, looked at zero lot line and concept of the downtown. Whereas the concept in the eastern corridor was more spread out. Campus. That was at least the thoughts. Now, why? But it,
Sounds pretty.
The regular,
Yeah, I know.
that language kind of came in, the 11th hour a little bit, at the request of the applicant. I think generally just things to consider when we think about parking out here. You know, it's a self-contained site. There's no opportunity for overflow parking. And so really, if you were I think to some degree, this is allowing kind of the market to dictate the parking demand for particularly, again, the adaptive reuse structure of the site, because that's kind of a self-contained.
There's no residents there.
Yeah, there's nowhere for it to. I think it's limiting. Get in the way of it. I think the hospitality one space per unit, I think, you know, typically, I think in the code, there's more like one place space per unit plus, you know, a few for employees. But again, I think if a hotel user wants a few more for their employees, they're gonna build it. So staff's not concerned with the reduction. Well, so we do have the language. Where, you know, we have a good understanding of where maybe shuttles are gonna come from or how they're gonna serve large events, because right, if they have 400 seat capacity, they can't park 400 cars, we wanna have, I think, make sure that that's safe, and our police and fire know how to, that would be development.
Specific types of development. Is the major thing I think town needs is more to look at. So, you know, there are probably a couple of things we probably don't want to dictate surface. That should be, you know, it does not dictate pressure fines or permeable surface, but at the same time not dictate or preclude hard surface, not porous surface for certain reasons. And the reason reason being that the entry into town, as was has been emphasized, needs to be welcoming and consistent with the character. So that an RV park or a spa or a car wash just needs to, we have to have a way to ensure it looks good. And the design guidelines are, they're not rigid, which is good, and that doesn't prevent some things that we don't want to have happen. Solid, it enables the prevention of it, but it's not like thou shalt not.
So the design guideline would not apply to a temporary use, right? So a temporary use is really intended to be kind of a short duration, 120 days, possibly one other term. I would say the condition the sites are in today, they're not ready for a temporary use yet. But I think it's also intended, right, like some modest improvements, they could do some temporary uses kind of pre-development, and then maybe, once they do have development on the site, they wanna do some pop-up events, they could do that later, right? So I think it's intended to be flexible. But wouldn't be defined guideline, wouldn't be.
Just silly question on temporary uses. If one of them is used, not allowed.
No, I think you just have to say with a straight face that use was kind of. Right, no, there's nothing in there that says like how quickly you could potentially reapply and stand it back up again. Yeah.
So temporary uses don't have any sign off except for town administrators, so what about owners? Is there, I think some temporary uses line on over there that maybe they wouldn't like, but.
So the way it's drafted now, it would not, require any public review. We would, I think, factor, we would, if there's reasonable conditions we're aware of, is we think we could potentially not issue a renewal based on complaints of the neighbors or outside concerns. Or if we would deny it based on, kind of our concern.
So there's an appeal process. Right. Appeal process if the rejects. Would there be appeal process if the police?
We don't, no, we don't have that a resident or a neighbor could appeal.
That's what I want. I tried to plan for this.
Well, but some way of saying that the town does have
Sue the town.
I would say my reasoning about it, that's not, once it's permitted issue, to have the length of a adjacent party be able to revoke.
well, I'm believing, having been situations in which have rights. At the same time, trying to respect the fact that people do have lots of feelings. There should be some way of sort of saying, look, we did everything we can to enable the temporary uses to be nice, consistent with the town, beneficial. I think that for the most part, and I have no doubt that things that are kind of contemplated. I'm just thinking that there should be some way for the town to say, and we're working diligently to make sure that's the way nice entrance to the town. It will be beneficial in other ways in terms of sales tax, property tax, whatever might go along with it. But it's not just, well, all of a sudden there are a bunch of trailer trucks parked out there, you know, they're all zigzag, you know, lots of mud around, that sort of, which I don't think in, you know, don't see that anywhere.
Well, so again, this is something that we kind of spin up at the last minute. I think if this is a conversation that is interesting to PCDC, we could talk about this town-wide. I think one advantage to that could be if this wasn't embedded in the PUD, the town learns temporary uses, we need some tweaks to our temporary use code, we could do that and it would apply to this, right? I think the risk of this approach is this is our best shot at it. Certainly interested in your feedback, but it would live in the PUD. Do you wanna, I'm not sure how your thoughts on some of this or just kind of the concept in here, or do you wanna speak to some of these before I take up all that time?
You know, I think the town is gonna give, my concern is if you put too many hurdles, the only people who can afford to do them are Circle K and Starbucks and Papa John's and Subway. And I think we're trying to find interim uses, and I get the concern about setting a precedent on the site that we living. Totally understand that. I'm on the planning commission for our, so have been for 18 years. I've heard lots of proposals, so I get the concern. We're trying to find a way to strike a balance and create some flexibility. Honestly, RV storage would be great. I mean, we can't carry these properties forever while we wait for the market to come to life, right? We have to create a market, hopefully. And we're trying to find ways and uses that could help us, maintain the properties, keep something happening there, get eyes on the property. Right now, it's an abandoned warehouse that's a complete nuisance and hazard. We really should just tear it down. But we're trying to find a way to, make it work. I get the concern, I totally do. But, I mean, if you just look at the amount of money that Circle K has spent on just looking at trying to find a way to get sewer to the site, is they're the only people who can afford to do it, right? That's the kind of why that happens. So I'm a little biased to that because we're not chained. Not single. All the properties that we own. So, and then in terms of setback, I get the concern, but the gas station wants that setback because they want that gigantic island for the gas pumps. Frankly, if it was a 50-foot setback, I don't think it's a great gateway. 50 or 75. Park on the highway. That doesn't feel like
So don't do not take anything I said. Commercial design guidelines, not by reading those, and whoever was involved in that was not anti-business. And so nothing I'm saying is trying to put a barrier. In fact, if anything, I would love to see process improvement so that businesses could more rapidly and dependably move from idea to implementation. Having said that, we also can't be in a position where, it's a free-for-all that could have non-beneficial results. Which I think is our responsibility.
All right, I think, shall we move on? Yeah, that's a great. So we have to actually open the public hearing. as you read in the memo, I don't feel like I'm with this, but I don't wanna.
The motion can just start the discussion. And if you're not happy after the discussion with the motion, somebody can withdraw the motion and, right, so I think if you need a motion to just start the conversation, maybe a motion to direct staff to, work with the applicant to amend certain provisions that you're about to talk about. That, or just, motion to recommend approval and then you can discuss that.
So you can always add a friendly.
Yeah. You're not meeting the. So you have an active setting. Fine amongst yourselves, but we can't. They would have to withdraw so that you're able to talk about it outside the club.
Yeah. So, right. Trying to safeguard against.
Specific. Maybe let's concentrate first on kind of the uses that would be by right and for review and not temporary uses maybe be covered by the direction.
So again, no,
So yeah, I understand. primary uses are there first, but they don't have to be accessory to the primary use.
Sure.
Again. All the things. 3 to 4 uses, I don't know, I mean.
Maybe we can volunteer.
I think what's helpful for us, tell me otherwise, to potentially just tell us your concerns. And then staff and the applicant, I think, can brainstorm, some ways that, to the degree the applicant would like to amend their application, come back with some revisions based on, in response to your concerns. I don't know that you need to tailor the answer.
It's probable that this will never be solved. So this is just here, but I also feel like in a way, like,
What if the alternative is nothing, it stays blighted, it gets sold? I mean, I don't know, I get what you're saying, it would be nice if it wasn't just all one thing, but do we get to dictate that? Is that really what zoning is about? Like, that you have to use it for 4 different things, not just for these potential things? I don't know, I'm asking a question.
zoning's the only mechanism we have as a municipality to dictate development.
But to that level, like, that it had, so is it common that we say this parcel has to be more than one thing? Or is it that we say this parcel can be any of these things?
The applicant has a vision, and the zoning that they're wanting to be part of the PUD fits that vision, but the PUD doesn't have the specificity around their vision. So this is a way of us saying, yeah, do that thing you showed us that's really cool, but there's no guarantee that it will ever get done.
But is there actually a way for us to do what you're saying?
Yeah,
Is it
most cities,
sustainable?
When the CDC was planned, because it was planned that we need people to use some, way back when we talked about.
So just not doing use by special review.
Yeah, but I don't know what that is, that creates a major time barrier for
well, signals also
users.
challenge. Well, we have a PUD that says the town's interested in development in trusted land. They go out by partner. We say, no, we don't trust you. Yeah, partner. But it's a weird thing.
It could be the temporary, also could be a blended sale.
here.
That I think is a layer that the special review. This may or may not be fine, but how you read it and address it makes it okay, rather than the presumption that it's okay.
And so you also don't want to create time period.
No, we do
Because
not.
it's in the town's best interest for things to get done. So, don't takes to have another start. Visions for a thing to work on.
So again, similar to the temporary uses where we have kind of criteria and procedure in the PUD, you could put that in, could put that in the PUD. I would also just want to remind you, every experience where processed elsewhere, a major development plan or equivalent and a special review, they're paired together as one, right? So that you can see on the major development plan how all the provisions of the special review use. So it adds a layer of uncertainty that I think the process is already happening. If that makes sense for future applicants to consider when we think about the special review. That would be on first bill. Change of use in an existing structure, it would add certainly a layer that they would. So just think about that.
Like separate.
Thought about that. That would say, yeah. That's a use that we. So we are gonna have time to have a. Wherever that are allowed, that we may consider to have that.
So my other concern, my background. So my direct company actually did that natural medicine out of. So those are also highly permitted in Colorado, so I saw one of the other things here is, the special review for light industrial, where it has to have permits for air emissions for CDPH, but what about water? So we've gotten a little trouble here with our distillery with water. So are there other things that are gonna look at some of those aspects of? There's probably a lot of businesses that would love to take 4 acres of land. Do something without a sewer line.
Sewer's not right there. It's for people on the corner, they have.
Oh, yeah.
It's really important. We've toured with, one of the town residents who's a realtor whose family owns lots of light industrial. We've toured lots of projects with him and, it's everything from a fitness gym and a boxing gym to automotive repair to upholstery to artisans to, it's everything, right? We don't have anybody in tow or nobody, expressed, well, we have, Element has expressed interest. Who are building the spas next door in that kind of building where Tebow's the very east end. They've completely outgrown it. So,
I think the interesting thing, just historically, there was just a lot of time for us to, with folks on the front end, work of it. And least the light industrial piece came up because at that time, the very last piece of that type of use was being condoized and sold, and so there was nothing like that available in the town, and we just kept hearing that this is a real need for our people, if we want them to stay here to work, they have to have a place to work, otherwise they're gonna go to Longmont or Boulder or Wells County or something further away, so, but to Paul's point, you know, we can build it, but we don't run those businesses, right? So I think a 1,500 square foot building that has approachable rent is great for an upholsterer or great for a fitness gym or great, so it does tend to be a mix of uses. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, so I know there's the protective part of that, but that it does seem to be now that like folks are using that light industrial space creative ways to run things.
So.
But then, right, yeah, that-
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
turnover.
I guess,
Sounds like we're gonna start over. I mean, we're zoned agriculture, max commercial. Zoned agriculture.
But we can't do agriculture.
I guess, sort of withdrawing your application. I'm just thinking, are there any changes that you all are thinking about in response to some of the concerns that they might see at the next meeting? Or do you don't have to commit, but I'm just wondering if you already have.
I think that they're gonna have to. It's on the site. I don't. We brought in the name Stebbins. Love it. They really love a lot of aspects. If we, anything we do to get there, we would, there is no there. We would love to try to make that happen, but there might need to be some interim uses that you don't love. I get it, but short of,
And the challenge is that there's multiple of those. So let's say there were 4 special review, and then each of those 4 had to go through, and then suddenly we're months and years into special review. So that's also the hard part, is that like that, even the PUD process takes.
and the amount of money to spend to just prepare for this.
But that's not in any way, shape or form where I was thinking about. By special review, there's some step that the town can rely on that the results of the initiation of the interim program, which I think is the right thing to do, and I support it completely, but it just needed to look nice. And I have no doubts that if, anything that you develop directly would do that, but are there ways in which you could develop it to somebody else doing something that
So one option might be lengthening the time frame for temporary uses to maybe more of a multi-year, narrowing those and limiting those. So that, right, so for maybe RV storage is a temporary use of a much longer nature. So that might be something that we explore with the applicant. Just to maybe try and expand some of these for initial years, but ensure that they do not live on entirety. I don't know. Such as RV storage, for example.
But that would at least allow you to have, create some income on the site and be useful, I mean, the property right next door. They have a car. But, yeah. Yeah, that's the idea, but yeah, okay, but yeah, but I mean.
Or a temporary use that narrow down the temporary uses. Or, up to 180 days for this initial process, administrative. Longer than that, the public hearings to make sure the neighbors have the opportunity to weigh in. We allow the initial. They could potentially be up to 5 years or something. Approval of a public hearing or something, so we can publish that.
Help posting.
Yeah. I think that feels fairly. Timeline. One more question about. Process. Development standards. Any direction on development standards?
There's something there.
No, I'm curious. I know you guys have brought it up, but. Do you have any direction? I would assume no. Constructive permit. I think we had. I don't envision a scenario, we can make that more clear,
Yeah.
where a building would get approved this way. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe.
yeah.
But if you have faith that our major development review process would trigger something that's garish, you probably would.
Questions are clear.
The only comment about the first. The thinking there was for the RV area, that we wanted to do small shower component for them. That would take in the addition of a 500 square foot. Or there.
Yeah, that's what I was just looking at the calendar. So they have to, start public hearing. Date certain. So I don't. How much time we can put this line.
Yeah.
September 8th is our next meeting, but I know with the holiday in there, that. continue it. We could come back, so if we get it too soon, we can just say we're requesting a continuance to the next time certain, so there's no problem with that. It's the availability on the 22nd. Oh, I can make that work. Okay. But if all of you are all around. That's fine, let's get the date on the. I can do it. We're just getting compliant.
It's not, yeah, I don't think that's like around.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. All right, you have an ordinance resolution, recommending approval of an ordinance in response to some state law regarding wireless communications facilities, otherwise known as cell towers. So I am going to,
Let's go ahead and move on to that staff report.
So this was. Sorry, here we go. Town attorney prepared this ordinance, not something that, staff is high degree familiar behind this, but it is, intended to respond to state legislation regarding wireless communications facilities. As you probably know, we're heavily regulated by federal government and state governments to allow certain types of facilities, one of which is what we call an eligible facilities request. And that is the cell tower that exists today or cell facility that exists today, and it allows or requires local governments to allow expansion up to a certain degree, under what they call a shot clock. So we have so many days to approve it, and it really kind of sets forth our process. So this state legislation, says we cannot kind of require permits for eligible facilities requests, except we can apply generally applicable and non-discriminatory building electrical fire permits. So, town attorney has drafted language in response to state legislation that, establishes the timeline for those reviews and, keeps us in compliance with state and federal law. I'm happy to pull up the language in the ordinance if you have any questions. Wireless communications facilities are codes because they have some degree of input. We can regulate them where. So that is, right? You can't say they're fine here, they're not fine there, and if you have them, then you have to treat it. Like training, color. Yeah. Yes.
It boils down to compliance and stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
And so the attorney has taken care of the compliance.
Yep.
And has enabled the town fire district to look at safety.
Yeah.
So,
We already require building permits for these types of things, so it just continues our building. Require building permits for these types of things.
All right. Is there a motion to approve resolution 2025-? That motion.
Oh, public hearing. Sorry, public hearing.
Yep.
Back up the step, please. Closing that loophole.
All right, then the last, our consent agenda are.
November 27th, I can't.
But that,
That would have been October 27th.
Yeah.
We can correct the date.
So,
but the,
Or for the 20th.
oh, go ahead.
I have one exciting update. I wish I could do with them. So. Station work is happening with the shoring plan, so that's really great. The work happening in downtown right now that you see is CDOT is upgrading all the intersections to meet updated ADA design standards, so I'm not sure how many more weeks that is planned to happen. Dolores, do you know offhand?
I don't know.
Yeah, this is an expensive project.
Dave, they already have the rules there.
I don't know what to.
I know, exactly, I'm like, that was a.
I actually.
That's why.
And then one other just agenda kind of timing request for you, so you have the natural medicine law that we need to discuss. We have to kind of allow it, but get the opportunity to talk about which zone districts it's applicable, if we want to do any buffers from certain other types of uses like schools and things like that. So we'd like to bring that to planning commission, either as a workshop to give you guys a little bit of time to talk about buffers in zone districts, or as an ordinance. So we could either do December 8th, if you would like to do that night, or we could try and pair it on the December 22nd meeting if you all would like the 8th off.
I'm actually gonna come.
No idea. I can't. I don't know. Until I talk with them, I don't. Eight. Right. All right. So I would say plan sure which fashion it will come to you in. Actually, I think it has to come as a workshop, so we haven't noticed it. I haven't noticed. Yeah, so this will be a workshop, summary. We'll look at that too.
I would think so. The natural medicine framework, the natural medicine act was modeled on a lot of the cannabis framework, but it's different. Healing factors, it's a very different animal. It's not, they're not gonna be selling true, like licensed healing factor. But it was modeled out.
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of
Any other questions and stuff? Oh, a couple other things. Had a lot of conversations about the noise ordinance. So if you've been tracking the noise ordinance conversation, the board heard an update from the noise study consultant last meeting. We also heard an update from recent case law around the limitations now placed on local governments about our ability to regulate noise that exceeds the state limit. So we're putting a really brief ordinance in front of our board at first reading on December 1st. It doesn't come to PCDC, but if you've been tracking their conversation, that's about to come back. And then we have a board, the board also desired to take a look at our construction hours noise ordinance too. So right now we're 7 to 7, 7 days a week. They're keeping the 7 to 7 during the week. The draft ordinance is 7 to 7 on weekdays and go from 9 to 5 on weekends and legal holidays. So a little bit of a change on construction hours. So lots of activity.
It's about sound ordinance.
Yeah.
That's something that
No, I think it would, except the fact that it's 55. So that was a bit of a shock to the noise world by the state law. So I think it will probably get taken up by the state legislature.
You're talking louder than right now. I'm trying to tell people that
See, we would have to have public meetings, big workshops for us, help us.
that's his special. That's what's pretty. No, think, it's next to the highway. I mean,
It's killing my dog. My dog went to go out. They're talking about that.
Typically, local schools are exempt because they're regulated by the state, so we have limited ability to influence the school, but
Hurts it.
doesn't bother.
Doesn't bother him. Oh, it's my huge dog.
My dog
will
loves
not
that
stop.
dog. Can't get it. Some people watch by that. But I can't.
all right. Thank you all for the good discussion. I'm sorry that it felt a little unguided. We were really, I think, as staff, you know, we saw some pros and cons to this application that I'm really happy that you all, you know, took it thoughtful and give us some direction and hopefully do better. Yeah. All right. Motion to adjourn.
All right.